Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I'm here to talk about the latest episode of the Orville Season 3. It was called From Unknown Graves. And as the episode starts, we're in the home of an alien family living in a very humanish, typical middle-class suburb type setting as they unbox and welcome into their home a kaylon, which it would seem they're going to have around as a servant. They've purchased a kaylon servant. We then get the opening credits, and when we come back, Lamar and the sexy security lady person who I'm beginning to remember the name of, her name is Tala, we're, fooling around, and Lamar gets hurt. When he goes to sickbay, we learn that he's been getting hurt a lot lately in these little encounters, but he makes off like it's from a workout in the simulator, meaning that he's apparently hiding his relationship with Tala. The doctor takes care of him, and then she rushes off to a date with Isaac, who has been studying human dating rituals, leading him to complimenting the doctor on her appearance. And of course, speaking of appearance, he puts on the glamour or whatever you want to call it so that he looks human when he's dating her, I guess. This compliment that he gives her is followed by a conversation about whether they are or are not a couple and so forth. And I don't understand all of this because they tried this once before and it didn't work out. The reason it didn't work out is because he's a frickin' robot, and it's the same problem we saw on Star Trek when that one officer tried to date Data. So I don't know. Anyway, next we join a mission briefing where the command crew is discussing a species called the Genesi, and apparently they're militantly matriarchal, which, to the surprise of the rest of the command crew, elicits an interesting reaction from Bortus, who seems to find their elevation of one gender as being supreme to be backwards, which is kind of funny. Anyway, they want to negotiate some kind of treaty with these people or form an alliance. So the captain and Kelly come up with a plan whereby the command crew is reorganized, in terms of uniforms anyway, so that the higher ranking males appear instead to be lower ranking, whereas female officers were elevated in rank. So Tala becomes the first officer, Kelly's the captain, so that the arriving militant female ladies wouldn't feel like they were dealing with a society that valued males, because they don't value males. And so they wouldn't necessarily respect the union. So anyway, that's the scenario. There was a funny scene when these ladies arrive where Gordon and Ed essentially have to play bellhops to these ladies, requiring them to carry a boatload of luggage around with which they struggle. It was kind of funny. Meanwhile, the family from the opening sequence is sitting down to a family dinner while their kaylon servant, who would appear to be named K1, and who prepared the meal, serves it to them. And it's weird because his eyes are neither red or blue, they're orange. So we've never seen that. Anyway, when one of the kids asks if the K1 can go to school with them, the parents say no, but then K1 starts to inquire as to why and saying that he'd like to go. And he ends up having to be reprimanded because he's not supposed to speak unless spoken to. At the same time, Ed, Gordon, Bortus, and Charlie go down to the planet that they've been in proximity to in neutral space between the Union and where they met, and the space that these matriarchal people come from, in order to determine some things that they would normally be able to determine by scan from orbit, but were unable to. When they arrived, they discover a lab in an underground facility, which would seem to be manned by yet another orange-eyed kaylon who calls himself Timus. And before any shenanigans go down, they also see that he's there with an alien woman who is apparently the daughter of a famed cyberneticist who, along with said famed cyberneticist who had passed away, repaired Timus, who had crash landed there during the big battle from last season, and then caught their attention when they were passing by, his signal, I guess, or whatever. So The captain brings them up to the ship because he determines that the Union has to be made aware of what's been going on there, which it would seem was the discovery of the kaylons' ability to feel emotions if a certain procedure is performed on them. And it was pretty interesting because Timmis expresses regret for what the kaylon did, and he expresses affection for biologicals, and says that he just wants to coexist with them. In the next scene, we learn that Tala is thinking of breaking up with Lamar because she doesn't want to continue to hurt him during their interludes, but he convinces her that they can find a way to manage it. Next, we're back with the alien family that has the Kaylon servant, K1, and we see that he is starting to bristle at his plight as a servant, which doesn't sit well with his owners, who very much see him as property and who treat him like crap, actually, because they see him that way. Back on the ship, Timmis and Isaac discuss how the Kaylon were wrong to judge all biologicals by the actions of their builders. And Timmis tells Isaac about how the alien doctor lady could make it so that he could feel emotions too if he wants to. Meanwhile, Lamar gets really badly injured again during an interlude with Tala. Then the doctor asks Isaac what he thinks of Timmis, and when he tells her that it would be possible for him to experience emotions, she's dumbfounded by the fact that he seems not to have any interest in doing it. Back on the alien planet, it seems that the company that's been farming the Kaylon out as servants has been getting a boatload of complaints from their customers. And the guy in charge comes up with a solution of upgrading them in such a way that it would eliminate the complaints rather than doing a recall, which doesn't sit well with his immediate underling. Back on the ship at a diplomatic dinner with these matriarchal ladies, I guess the Genesi, they explain that they don't let males have any kind of power at all because of how men had too often led their people into horrible conflict. When one of them takes a shine to the captain and wants to mate with him, Kelly has to end the charade, and they don't react well to the truth, which is that in the Union, men and women work side by side as equals. But this doesn't occur before Gordon volunteers to take his place.
I'll do it.
To no avail. When Charlie wanders into the lab where Timmis is, along with the lady doctor, Timmis approaches Charlie expressing heartfelt regret about what the Kaylon did and about what she lost. But it doesn't really seem to cut any ice with her, even though he explains that not only were they treated like crap, the Kaylon, but they were tortured when they didn't comply correctly, which we see demonstrated via cutaways to the alien family, which it is clear now all take place in the past, before these particular aliens, who I guess are the builders, were wiped out when the Kaylon rebelled. Kelly and the doctor have a conversation about the efficacy of asking someone to make changes to who they are in order to improve a relationship, after the doctor straight up asks Isaac to get his emotion chip, as it were, by explaining to him that it would be a way for him to learn more about humanity. Lamar gets really, really, really hurt while in bed with Tala this time, and they both realize that they do have to break up. In a last-ditch effort to reach some kind of accord with the Genesi, Kelly and Ed discuss the fact that they used to be married and that she was the one who cheated, whereas he was faithful, even though there was no law preventing him from being with other people, as there is in Genesi culture, where women are free to do whatever they want and men have to stay monogamous or celibate. And because of this, the Genesi decide that, okay, well, maybe we will still consider making an alliance with you. We can, have talks again in the future. Isaac decides to undergo the emotion chipping, as it were, and then invites Claire to dinner. And upon her arrival, he explains that he's been experiencing intense emotion and that he loves her and the kids, after which they dance romantically. But during the dance, Isaac realizes that the chipping didn't actually take, and his ability to feel emotions spontaneously disappears. And it turns out that the reason for this is that he was built by the Kaylon, who had been built by the builders. He wasn't built by the builders directly. And so there are differences between his systems and Timmis's. And it turns out that the only way to permanently give him emotions would be to erase his memory. and he volunteers to allow his memories to be erased. But Claire wisely decides that she doesn't want that trade-off. She doesn't want to trade who he is, who he's become through his experiences, for a completely fresh version of him that happens to be able to feel emotions, because she would be giving up the being that she fell in love with for a stranger. Charlie approaches Isaac and apologizes for treating him poorly, because she now realizes that she oversimplified the situation with the kaylon, just like the kaylon did with biologicals when they judged all biologicals by the actions of the builders. So I like this episode because I liked that we got to see what actually happened to the kaylon. We hadn't really seen that before. We didn't really see the treatment that they received by the builders or from the builders played out. We only heard about it. So now that blank is sort of filled in. A cool thing about that too was that it was a new alien race we hadn't seen before. And it was interesting that they kind of lived like middle-class American humans, which was interesting. I liked the Genesi ladies from the matriarchal society because they looked really cool. They had a cool design. I didn't think too much of the plot with Lamar and Tala because it was just sort of surface. It wasn't terribly deep. It was just, wow, we want to be together, but we can't. And that's a bummer. And so it's like, okay, well, why did they take up time with that? It just, I don't know. Maybe they'll revisit it, but it just seemed like wasted time. And then there was the plot with the doctor and Isaac, which, you know, is interesting on one level because the dynamics of their relationship put, you know, certain elements of the human condition on display and up for discussion. And that's always cool. But I feel like we did this already. We did this thing where they tried to date and it didn't work out. And so now they've sort of done it again, unless they continue to date and she just accepts him the way he is. But not only that, I always found the whole thing to be bizarre because unlike in the situation with Data, who has a humanish face, you know what I'm saying? It's just not a human skin tone, but he has a human face. And so there he has features that, you know, among humans are part of the basis of physical attraction. And, you know, he can engage in activities with his face that an entity without a face cannot, both PG and not so PG. So in order for things to work out with the Doctor and Isaac, he has to put on a glamour, not only so that he doesn't look like a robot, but so that he can, one presumes, use his face. And it just seemed to me that he shouldn't have to do that in order to be in a romantic relationship. And the idea that he was doing that to me made the relationship seem cheap. Because in other words, she couldn't just date him as the robot with just the blue eyes and no face and all that. She had to have him look human or she couldn't date him. And it's like, really? What the hell is that? Like, if you're attracted to his personality, such as it is for a robot, then that's great. And if you think you want to have a very close interpersonal relationship with him that veers into the territory of sexual interaction, then you have to be satisfied with what he can do with whatever equipment he has without making himself look human in order to add equipment to that list. Or, for example, an aesthetic that works for you, you know, like the human aesthetic in terms of your ability to be attracted to him physically. So this whole thing about, oh, can I really ask him to make change just for me? Well, you already did. You've made him put on this human appearance in order to date you. And that's really shitty. So I never got this whole thing. I never thought much of it. I understand that she does truly care for him, but I never thought it was fair for her to ask him to do that, or even allow him to do it if he had volunteered to do it for her benefit. So I never liked this relationship. So the idea that now she's balking at, well, I don't want him to, you know, I mean, I guess that makes sense. But again, is that really for him? Or is it she doing it for herself, because in other words, it's not worth having him be an emotional being that can be emotional with her if he might not even be the same person, and he might not even like her because he doesn't remember her, he doesn't know her. So was that really something she did to save him from having to give up who he is for his own benefit, or did she do it for her benefit? You know, I understand what they were going for and what they were trying to depict, which is, like I said, the efficacy of how far you can go in asking someone to adapt to you in order to be in a relationship with them, because it's something that humans struggle with and that we need to continually think about. But I think in this situation, it was problematic because she already kind of did that. And then, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I think they would have been better off not having him ever change his appearance for her if they wanted to tell this story, because it didn't make sense that she was saying, oh, I don't want to ask him to make a change, because she already did. And then she asks him to make another one. But then when it gets really, really complicated, she had the sense to back out. But I don't know. I didn't think they should have gone down that route for this, again. As for the plot with the Genesi, I thought it was very paint by numbers, where you have this society that is matriarchal and doesn't like men and has to be shown that men can be equals to women and sort of adjust to the concept. And, I thought it was very paint by numbers, the way they did it, or at least the way they talked about it. And I thought that it was, not new ground. It's subject matter we've covered before on other shows. And once again, it was a little bit on the nose, I think. It was a little bit, like I said, paint by numbers, where you could see, okay, they're setting up this matriarchal society so that they can talk about how men and women are equal. And I don't know if I'm less open to plots like that now because I'm so used to them. And by this point, those plots are, as they say, de rigueur, or, retread of stuff we've seen before. And so it doesn't really wow me like it might have 25 years ago on Next Gen, but it didn't really strike any chords with me. It just came off as, scenes that passed time in the episode. And by that, I don't mean that it was filler or, devoid of meaningfulness, because I think that the point they were trying to make was absolutely meaningful, but we've seen it before. And I think they sort of did it in a very A to B to C to D kind of way, rather than really weaving anything more interesting by painting with a less precise brush. So, yeah. And, I'm glad that they showed, that Charlie is starting to understand that she was sort of treating Isaac unfairly, because, I didn't like the fact that she didn't like him, and I wanted to see her come around. And so they've done that, and then they'll probably do some more of it. So that will be cool. But yeah, I didn't think this was a stellar episode. And, even the plot with the kaylon was kind of paint by numbers, where we see a society treating artificial life poorly, and the conversation comes up about what it is to own sentient beings and not treat them as equals in so doing, in the process. And again, I understand the point they were trying to make, and I think it's, it's timely, because race relation issues are still a thing, at least in the United States. And I think they might have been even speaking to both people of color and Caucasians, with that whole part about don't judge the entire group by the actions of a few. And that's cool. But again, it's like we've kind of seen it before. So I don't know. It didn't really strike much of a chord, to use that phrase again, with me. It was just kind of there. So, not a bad episode. It didn't have any stupid in it, as we see so often on other shows. And everybody did a good job playing the parts. And the alien, they showed us two different aliens that were new, but I didn't think it packed any kind of punch or held any kind of weight. It was just an hour of TV, in fact, it was longer than that, where you go, Okay, cool. And that's it. That's all it was. So I don't know. Next week's a new episode, right? That's how you got to look at it. I will, of course, be back to review that episode. For now, I'm going to get out of here. And until I return, I wish you peace and long life.